So today we'll be talking about the capacity metric module that will be released with StableNet 11. And I'm starting my presentation today on the weather map theme here, showing different weather maps. And just as a quick repetition here, so typically weather maps are used to get a current state overview of the network. So you can create weather maps to see the different components or a subset of the components and to get a quick understanding what's the current status, if there are any problems to handle. And just here, one example is a network-based weather map, which is showing a subset of the network with the connecting links. And you can see here that everything's green, so there is no obvious alarm here in that part of the network. Or another weather map up here, for instance, which is showing parts of the data center and the different virtual machines, indicates some problems here that you could dive into now to see more clearly what's the actual issue. I will not do this in detail in this webinar, but this is the typical way you would normally work with a weather map. On the weather map tree here on the left side, I've actually created an advanced weather map tree for myself using the tag tree capabilities. So in this case, I have on the one side, I have added to the name the IDs of the weather maps because I keep using this quite a lot for working with the REST API, which you might know from previous webinars I gave. And on the other side, I have also added the devices and the measurements that are actually on the weather map, which on the one side gives me possibilities to more quickly even get to statistics, and also gives me the possibility to get a state icon here in a color, which shows me the overall state of the weather map. As I have said, normally the weather maps are being used for getting a quick overview of the current state of the network. Now today with the capacity metric module, we can actually extend the usage of weather maps beyond the current state and get a better statistical understanding and the possibility also for forecasting to by looking into statistics of the different data. So more precisely, we have a network graph here, and we currently see that in the network there doesn't seem to be a lot of traffic. So this is a demo lab here in our infrastructure in Würzburg, and we see that typically there is only a very limited amount of base traffic. This does not really help us to get an understanding of what are, for instance, the most loaded links typically in that network. So a normal approach we could normally use now to get this with the so far available functionality would be actually opening a group analyzer. And because I have this advanced weather map tag tree here with the nodes and measurements directly below, I can directly do this here from the weather map view. So I'm opening a group analyzer from here. And I would now, for instance, say that I want to have an interface statistic, and I want to see the most loaded interfaces by looking into the maximum bandwidth of the last 30 days of these measurements, and then I'm getting a result. And in this case, I see here the interfaces with the highest peaks in the last 30 days, where this is always the total sum of out and in. So it's about 2.25 in traffic and out traffic, pardon me, and the rest is in traffic. And I can also do a deep dive by clicking on this, and I will get a chart. And I can see here that on the day probably where we held our partner workshop, we had here a peak by doing some tests. So we had more than 2 gigabits on this interface. And so what I can see now is, anyway, I can see this data, but I don't have this data directly related to my network. So I don't directly see where this is now located on the weather map. And this is where the new capacity metric module comes into play. So I can now, with the capacity metric module, I can start configuring by modifying the weather map. I can start configuring here what I actually want to see. So the normal view is the current value, the last measured value, but I can now also do measurement statistics and, for instance, look into maximum value, trend values, quantiles, and traffic sums, and so on and so forth. And I can also use this to color here the links. So what I will do, rather than configuring this one by one, for the sake of time, I will quickly show some ready examples and just show how they are configured. So this is, for instance, the maximum of the last 30 days. So suddenly I can see this about 2 1/4 gigabits that I showed before. I can suddenly see them here on the map with the coloring. And if I'm now going again to the modify dialog, you can see that this is actually being configured as the measurement statistic maximum of the last 30 days. And here you have the thresholds that are being used for the colors. So until 1 gigabit is green, and then it's yellow, and so on and so forth. Another example here is a quantile, 95% quantile of the last 3 months. This takes a moment to calculate. So that's why it says update pending, please be patient. In the meantime, I can also show the modify dialog here. So in this case, we have the 95% quantile configured, and we actually are using on the one side thresholds for coloring the bandwidth related values here, the absolute traffic, and on the other side, we are using thresholds for the relative traffic. And actually, in this case, we have reconfigured the interfaces to have just 1 gigabit of traffic as the maximum, so that we can easier reach this range of an overload for the showcase here. That is also for those who were very, very attentive before, why we had 2 gigabits on an interface that seems to have just 1 gigabit of maximum bandwidth. This is because we reconfigured it here for showcasing this. So it's the last 3 months, 95% quantile. And with this, I gave a quick overview here on how you can use this to show different values on maps. I will now jump quickly to the next part, what comes with the capacity metric module, which is here a right-click functionality for weather maps, where you can open a capacity planning map. So this is actually opening the same map here in a planning view. It's the same weather map, but it's not a persistent view, but it's just for me for evaluation. And here I can, for instance, now start scaling the traffic. So this is for forecasting. So for instance, if I say I'm expecting the traffic to increase by 75% in the next half year or so, I can say that I want a scaling of 175%, and I'm sending this here. It takes a short moment to calculate. And we will actually see if we look at the values, like here is 47 megabits. So it's the quantiles are not very high, but just for the sake of showing it. So it's 47. And in a moment when the update is calculated, this will be increasing to an updated value. So need to be patient a bit here because it's quite some data being calculated. There we are. And it was increased from 47 to 83, which is 75% more. And now we can also use this to check the borders that we have configured for coloring. So I'm actually scaling the traffic by 0, which means that I'm completely nivellating it. There will be no traffic anymore, but I'm adding a value of, let's say, 500 Mbit to all the links, which should now end up with a map which is all yellow, because this was the threshold for my yellow values, and everywhere I will have precisely 500 M. So this is just showcasing the functionality, and obviously these values can be freely configured. There we go, it's 500 M everywhere. So let's just for a second test put 900 M everywhere, which will end up in critical values because this was the threshold. And so the bottom line for you as users is that using this feature, you can arbitrarily scale the traffic and add any arbitrary traffic, which gives you, there we are, it's critical, all of it. So this gives you the possibility to look into how the network is developing. And once more repeating, the base values that are used are not the current values, but in this case, it's the 95% quantiles, but it can be every statistic value that you are calculating before. So you could, for instance, take the peak values of the last month and use this for scaling up or down. So this is the second part which I want to show. Now, for the sake of time, I'm directly jumping to the last part of what is coming with this capacity-centric module. The last part is that you can not only scale the traffic on weather maps, but you can also scale the individual statistics. So you might know from previous webinars that we gave on weather maps that here you have possibilities in the statistics to configure arbitrary values for the different nodes on a network or the links on a network. So in this case, for instance, we have the CPU utilization of a virtual machine. And I also have now, with this capacity metric module, I have a possibility to scale the values and also to add additional values. So what I did on this weather map here, I added to the CPU usage of every single virtual machine, I added 1 gigahertz just to showcase the functionality and to give an impression what this means for the usage of the CPU if it's running with 1 gigahertz more than it's currently doing. And the same I did here with the RAM. In the RAM case, I did not increase the memory by an added value, but I did scale it up by a factor of 200%. And I also defined some values for color highlighting. And last but not least, down here, for instance, for the free space, it doesn't make sense to look at the maximum free space, but it makes more sense to look at the minimum free space to get an understanding of what was the lowest available space back in time. And then I did not scale it up, but I scaled it down because it makes more sense to look into what is happening if it's decreasing. So I put 75% here. And as a result, I get a weather map here, which is highlighting with colors the potential spots where I might get too much if it's increasing, or I might get not enough free space anymore. So this is the result. As the last part, I want to quickly look for those people of you working in an advanced mode with weather maps using the REST API. I want to quickly jump into how this looks in REST in the XML format. So for this case, I'm taking this 95% quantile map with ID 1104. I'm jumping to my REST client, and I'm just getting that weather map using REST. And if we look at the example, so the general structure has been explained in other webinars and is also part of the documentation. But if I'm specifically looking here, like closing the weather map nodes and links, which are part of each weather map, and specifically looking at the down part of the weather map XML, then I see this new block here, which has been added, which is a link traffic block. And in this link traffic block, I can actually see the configuration of what I have just seen in the rich client. So I have ranges for the absolute values indicating the colors, like this is the green color range. 500 is warning state color, 4,000 is major alarm state color, and 5,000 is critical alarm color. And I have the same for relative ranges. So up to 50% is green, 50 to 70% is warning state, 70 to 90 is 4,000, which is major state. And there we go with the critical state. And in this case, is a measurement statistic of the 95% quantile. There could equally be a 90% quantile here, or a max, or a min, or a sum. And the time multiplier that I have is the last month, the last 3 months. So there could equally be 24 last hours or whatever else you could think of. So this was a very quick look behind the scenes here of the weather map. I will also look behind this weather map here with the statistics. So this is ID 1093. So if I'm jumping there to 1093, sending this, here, I'm not using the link traffic part, but I'm using the statistics part. And if you look into these statistics, you actually see here, for instance, I have a measurement, which is the maximum CPU times 2. And this is actually done by a metric scale, which is added to the statistics. So these statistic fields have been there in the XML before. And now you can add an additional tag here, metric scale, which says add nothing, but multiply it by 2. And another thing here, down here for the CPU, for instance, is add 1,000, add 1 gigahertz, but multiply it with 1, and so on and so forth. So you can see the different examples here that I showed before. You can see them in the XML. Here, this is scaling by 75% to decrease the free space. So summing up what I showed today, with the capacity metric module, you have a possibility to go beyond just looking onto the current state. You can look into historic state and different statistics and see this directly highlighted on the map. You can use a planning view to look into forecasting what is happening if the data is scaled or if there is traffic added. And you can not only use this for the traffic on the links, but you can also use this for different statistics in the map. And obviously, you can also put this into dashboards and then have not just the live view, but also the different statistic views and forecast views, for instance, in a collected dashboard here with the current state, the maximum of the last 30 days, the total traffic of the last 30 days, and some sort of forecast what would happen. Thank you very much.